Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. And today is day 5 of my Halloween week of videos. We have made it through to the end, and I hope you either had or are having a very happy Halloween. In 1984, the slasher genre had kind of run its course. Pretty much every holiday had a slasher film named after it. The Friday the 13th franchise was ending with the final chapter. The Halloween franchise had kind of petered out with Halloween 3, and it seemed like the slasher genre was kind of ending. It was very much oversaturated. Lots of people say that in around 1981 there was about a new slasher film every week. Now it's cooler, but at the time they were just so oversaturated with them, people were getting sick of them. And then Nightmare on Elm Street came along and redefined 80s horror. It very much takes from the structure of a slasher film and the way they have characters throughout it, and how the first character to die is a sexually active girl and the next character to die is the guy she had sex with, very much sticks with the slasher mode, but it's not a slasher movie. Sometimes people act like this is a slasher movie. Those people are either overusing a genre or they just honestly don't know what they're talking about. What Nightmare on Elm Street did is it changed from having just a nameless psycho in a mask with a knife going after kids and making a surreal supernatural horror film. A much more well-made horror film, a much more stranger and crazier movie than people were really expecting, and Nightmare on Elm Street lit everyone's imaginations on fire. The thing that this film establishes is having more creature makeup, having more gore, having more surreal gore, having a more surreal sense to horror, not having such a literal guideline to go down. Without Nightmare on Elm Street, you wouldn't have Child's Play and many other rip-off characters after that. Child's Play is probably the most direct one. But Wes Craven came along and completely changed horror and reinvigorated it. That wouldn't be the first time he did that to the horror genre, since he did that again in the 90s with Scream. But Nightmare on Elm Street probably doesn't get discussed as much with its rejuvenation of the horror genre as Scream did. But in the 80s, he kind of took what was already a very fruitful and amazing time in horror and brought it into the rest of an incredible decade for horror and kept it going and gave it new life. There's a quality of this film that you don't really know what's going to happen, and it surprises you. It has this feeling of anything can happen that is very hard for live action films to do. That's more of an animation thing, but Nightmare on Elm Street gets it quite a lot in this film. There's a lot of times I was like, holy shit, what? You have these surreal dream states and you're not sure like what's a dream and what's not, and there's like a real feeling of freedom throughout this film that probably when you're having a genre that had incredibly rigid rules and very slight variations, this was such a breath of fresh air. No wonder it was such a big deal, and no wonder people were praising Wes Craven for making it. A group of 4 teenagers were suddenly all having nightmares about the same character with long fingernails, long knife-like fingernails, and a red and green sweater. And they just take it as odd that they're all dreaming about having nightmares about the same guy, until one of the girls, Tina, is suddenly killed in her sleep and crazy things start happening to her in the bed as she's levitated up. Her chest bursts open like someone scratched it and she dies, and then her boyfriend Rod is sought after by the police and arrested, but slowly Rod is killed in a similar sleeping accident and things are going awry as Nancy hopes she can find out who this character is, figures out it's Freddy and finds out why exactly he is haunting them, and hopes she can eventually take Freddy out before he kills any more people. I think one of the things about audiences that no one really says, but it's very true, is that audiences like Hollywood. They will reject very Hollywood things for a while, but they're always gonna come back. And that's always been the case, whether it's musicals or superhero movies or whatever, they're always gonna show up for it. And after these slasher films that were mainly independent and not the greatest made unless you're John Carpenter or Sean S. Cunningham, a few other directors, but for the most part, they were made on a small budget, very minimally, and to very strict guidelines. Nightmare on Elm Street, although it is an independent film, it was made by a very small studio, New Line, which had such success with the Nightmare on Elm Street films, it was often called the house that Freddy built, and considered it actually a very reliable franchise. This film is made like much more of a Hollywood film, and I think people were ready for more of a Hollywood horror film. There really hadn't been that many, you have your Poltergeists and things after the Halloween boom, and I think that this film was like that, drew people in. But the other thing about it is, sure, it looks like a Hollywood film, even though it isn't. It's a little off. Certainly the way people are killed, the way Johnny Depp's character is killed, and just that blood that shoots out of the bed, the way surreal things keep happening, the dreams that you're not sure are dreams. When certain dreams start happening, it feels unreal and strange, but it feels real at the same time. That's something that a lot of films can't really do. I often use the Nightmare on Elm Street films as a great example of a film that can do interesting things with dreams. Not a lot of films can do interesting things with dreams the way the Nightmare on Elm Street films can, and have so much fun with them as the Nightmare on Elm Street films do. But it adds an extra surreal quality, because when you feel like you're safe, when you feel like you're okay, and you feel like you're accustomed to this, you're like, I kind of feel like I know what's going on. When something crazy starts happening, they really set up that this is a normal world and these are normal teens, just like in the slasher films before they start knifing them and stuff. Instead, this girl's levitated off the bed and starts going on the ceiling and all this crazy stuff, and you don't know what to do. There's a certain part of movie making that I think people love. It's that seeing something they've never seen before, or being in awe of a special effect, or being like, how did they do that? And for a slasher film where you don't have the pizzazz that you previously had in Hollywood films, you look at Nightmare on Elm Street and it adds that level of pizzazz. You're like, holy shit, what is that? Although this film doesn't go as crazy with that as the other Nightmare on Elm Street films do, and they really do. They really go to the nth degree and really have crazy surreal imagery and dreamscapes and all that stuff. And I think this franchise is really good at it. I actually like that. This one might not feel as crazy as when you get to Nightmare on Elm Street 4. This doesn't feel as insane, so it's a little weird going back to this one, because you're like, oh, it feels a little quaint almost. But when you look at it through that perspective, you're like, holy shit. The other thing is Freddy Krueger was really another breath of fresh air to horror. Horror really hadn't had a character who wasn't like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, are kind of the stereotype of the slasher genre. They're mindless. Like the whole idea of The Shape before it was called Michael Myers was that it's just this person going off and killing, and it has no personality and no reason, and you don't know why. And I think that's really interesting, but if you saw 400 of those, you're gonna start to go, I don't give a shit anymore. Even though Halloween's an amazing movie, its imitators was just like seeing a photocopy of a shitty Halloween remake after a while. And Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger not only does have a reason, but he has a personality to him. Now, there was certainly a Bugs Bunny-fication, I guess, of Freddy Krueger that continued throughout the series. In this, he's probably at his most scariest, and you're not exactly sure what his abilities are, which is in fact scary, but he's a great character. He has a real personality to him, and that was something that a lot of villains in horror films just really didn't have great personality. Jason and Michael Myers aren't known for their personalities. They're known for their stabbing skills, and particularly Jason's hatred of windows. Wes Craven directed this very well, and I think one of the things that he's really good at when he's directing any film about teens and horror is that he really gets into the idea of the quest to destroy this villain or figure everything out. And you're almost just as into that as you are into being scared. It tries to figure out what exactly is going on with Freddy. It feels like more of an investigative horror movie than you probably give these films credit for. I really like Heather Longcamp as Nancy. This is obviously her signature role. There's a certain real element. I mean, that's one of the things that this film does better than all of them, is it establishes reality. It feels normal. There's a lot of things in this film that I'm like, yeah, it does take fundamental elements from slasher films. It's understanding what a slasher film is, but it's just taking it in a weird direction. That might be what shocked people about suddenly she's in the air, like blood splurting out of the bed, or Freddy's arms going out and things like that, is like you almost don't expect it. But Heather Longcamp's acting in particular is a lot more realer than the Hollywood acting going on from everyone else. She feels like she's like a real person in it, more so than anyone. And you could say that's like unprofessional acting. And at a certain point I was like, maybe she's not that good. But there's a smarter thing that Craven's doing, and maybe she's doing, I don't know if she was doing it as well or he was using her abilities to say that, is that you need to follow her. And the realer she seems, the more you're going to be drawn to her. I think she's rather good in this movie. There's different styles of acting, and there's different ways to use styles of acting, and the way she does it is very smart and really gets you into the film. This is also Johnny Depp's first movie. He was apparently picked because one of Wes Craven's daughters thought he was pretty. When I think of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, I think of the surreal imagery, I think the playfulness, I think of Freddy Krueger, of course. When I watch this film and at least the first four, these are always kind of fun horror films, in a way that the Friday the 13th films were as well. The Friday the 13th films were really made to be roller coaster rides, which is why these two could cross over so well. It's not just because they're the big horror movie villains. Theory-wise, they play into each other. This is probably the least least fun. Well, New Nightmare is probably the least fun. So this is like second to least fun Nightmare on Elm Street films, but it's more interested in being a horror film. Freddy Krueger's named after his childhood bully. He heard that red and green are the two most contrasting colors to the retina, so he'd be very memorable, but he really tried to do something different, very purposefully. Keep it in a world you already knew. Wes Craven was very smart because he understood, like, well, how can I get this to work in today's society? And the fact that he did this twice shows how smart this guy was. Certainly the savageness of his early work is on display in here, but in a more surreal, strange quality. I really like how it can sneak up on you in a lot of ways, using that more natural world. And that's what's so cool about this movie. One of the things when people go, oh, you have to see this, you're not going to believe what it does, that helped this franchise. It helped this movie because people would be like, you're not going to believe what this Nightmare on Elm Street movie is going to do. Even Inception I was disappointed by, because I like when people play with dreams and things are nonsensical and weird and strange, and it gives you an excuse to play, and Craven knew how to do that, and you accept it because it's dream logic. I've often revisited this film, and Craven has a lot of well-known films in his filmography, and this is probably the biggest standout of them all, or the one everyone remembers. And I think the reason you remember it is because it took horror by storm. No one saw Nightmare on Elm Street coming, and it rejuvenated it at a time where people liked horror. He was able to play in a way. And I think that's one of the things that the slasher films, there are certainly a lot of them got the roller coaster rideness of Friday the 13th and got the playfulness in those, but none of them were playing like this. This is like Fleischer Brothers stuff. This is like playful gore and strangeness that people just weren't really thinking about. And I think Craven gets what direction to move in. He wrote and directed this film. It took him forever to get it to be made, but I think it got made at the exact right time. The horror genre was primed for something to happen, and this represents the possibility and what you could really do with a genre and make it fun and excessive and crazy and surprise people. He was known for doing shocking, crazy movies that surprised people in their gruesomeness, but this did it in much more of a playful, smart filmmaker way. You can tell he's a much more grown-up director than his earlier work, and although he was becoming a lot more of a professional, kind of almost a studio director, if you look at things like Swamp Thing, this is a studio director being playful and having fun, but doing it more purposefully and smarter and laid out. I think that's why this juxtaposition works so well for people. Carpenter was a fine-tuned filmmaker, and that's why the first Halloween's great. Sean S. Cunningham knew what he was doing and was a friend of Craven's, by the way. A Nightmare on Elm Street got that most of these people didn't know what they were doing, and Craven really did. He had lots of experience, and when he makes Nightmare on Elm Street, he really shows himself off as a director and all the surreal, strange, kind of weird stuff he can do. In a lot of these dream sequences, there's a little bit of like Maya Deren and experimental filmmaking in this that he can play with, but you're not thinking of that. There's experimental film in there. There's different elements in there, and he knew how exactly to bring it and when to bring it and the reason he was bringing that to the movie and the possibility of independent horror at the time. I think that's why people love Nightmare on Elm Street. They love this franchise, but particularly this movie, because it showed them that all this crazy shit was possible and they weren't ready to be hit with it, and it surprised the hell out of them, and it gave them the possibility that horror could be surprising, and I can't believe that just happened. Just like when the first Halloween came out, just like when Scream came out, just like when Psycho came out, and just like when the Universal Monsters movies came out. It gave people that thrill, and that's why people like this movie, is because Craven had, you can tell, had a thrill mixing up all these styles, and people were too used to a very literal version of horror films, and Wes Craven came and gave them a very surreal, strange dream movie where Freddy Krueger and his knife fingers are gonna come and slash you open while you're dreaming. And frankly, I think a lot of people woke up from the slasher nightmare they were having and were ready for the possibilities that Freddy Krueger was about to unmask. So if you have seen A Nightmare on Elm Street and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Thank you very much for watching the Halloween week of videos. If you were just watching this one, that's cool. Or if you watched all 5, that's even cooler. I thank you very much for watching. I wanted to pay tribute to Wes Craven and Christopher Lee, two horror greats we lost this year. So that's kind of why I did both these movies. If you want to see any of the other videos I've done for my Halloween week of videos, I've been doing this since I started making videos, which was 2009. So I have quite a few. So if you'd like to watch those, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a happy and safe Halloween, and I hope to see you next time and next Halloween.